Hello guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to be counting down the top 10 best Montreal Canadiens prospects right now in 2022. Now this prospect pool has actually changed a lot over the past couple of years, with most notably guys like Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield officially graduating, but there's a lot now with this new Habs rebuild that's already been drafted to look forward to, and especially with Justin Barron being acquired in the Arturi Lehkonen trade, there is so much defensive strength with this Habs team that's going to be so impactful over the next few years. But when it comes to this Habs franchise and the Habs prospect pool, who do I see as the best prospects right now, and which future Habs players make today's top 10? Watch till the end for all of the rankings, and make sure you hit that subscribe button to the Sportsnet YouTube channel for the best sports coverage around. And without further ado, let's get into the big guys that will lead the Habs future. Now we're going to start off the top 10 Habs prospect rankings at number 10, and we're going to start off with a guy that was drafted recently in the 2021 draft, 63rd overall by the Montreal Canadiens in the second round, in centerman Riley Kidney. Now, as a 19-year-old in the QMJHL, his production has been really better than expected this year. In 49 games, he has 25 goals, 49 assists for 74 assists. He's on pace for 101 points in 67 games. But you look at what he produced last year, and it's a pretty drastic turnaround. In 33 games last season, he only got 38 points, but in the playoffs, he got 17 points in 9 games, and I saw a lot of progression there. But when it comes to Kidney's overall offensive game, there's a lot to like. He loves driving the net, he loves creativity, he loves his playmaking, his passing is absolutely consistent, and he's a guy that loves to force high danger opportunities and really drive play. I think at number 10, this is an excellent player to start out, and I think he could be potentially a middle six center or even forward for the Habs in the future. The biggest thing I will preach when it comes to Kidney's game, though, is patience. He's a smaller forward and definitely plays like it in the QMJHL, so he'll definitely have to take some getting used to the pro game once he officially makes the AHL as well. But now we're going to go on to number 9 of the 9 best Habs prospect. This was actually the player drafted right after Riley Kidney, 64th overall in the 2021 draft. I just slightly prefer this player, and at number 9, I have Oliver Kapanen. Now, Oliver Kapanen's a weird one. He's also a centerman, again, 64th overall, but 6 foot, and he's been playing throughout the Mistis. He's been playing in the Liga. He's been playing in the U20 Liga throughout this year. In the U20, he has 15 points in 11 games, and in his last 2 Liga games, he has 2 assists as well for 2 points. He's an interesting one, though, because his development has kind of been all over the place, but he's a great scorer, a great player to get in front of the net and really charge play. He's a very energetic one and likes to get under the skin of opponents. He's a pretty versatile guy, and personally for me, as a scoring center in the NHL, I could see him being a solid third-line guy you can depend upon to get clutch goals and drive play pretty excellently. There's nothing really too absolutely crazy about Kapanen's game, but his finishing ability is one of the best, I think, of the 2021 draft, and I think that'll produce quite well as he goes onto the AHL and the NHL level for Montreal. But now we're going to move on to the first defenseman of this list, which, trust me, there will be many more over the top 10, but going on to number 8, we're going to go to another second-round pick by the Habs in JAYDEN STRUBLE. Now, JAYDEN STRUBLE was a second-round pick, 46th overall back in 2019. He's playing in the NCAA of Northeastern over these past few seasons, and in my opinion, has been a pretty consistent, great skating, great offensive mind. Last year, in 18 games, got 2 goals, 10 assists for 12 points. This year saw a little bit of a dip in production with only 14 points in 34 games, but I love his skating ability, I love his tenacity and his aggressiveness. He's never going to be a fantastic defensive player, but I think once he signs with the Habs, he'll be a very consistent, potentially a power play player that can be a solid guy offensively, make great passes and crisp ones at that, and really just have a simple game to him, which I think for the Habs going into the future will definitely be nice to have. Now moving on to number 7 and the 7th best Montreal Canadiens prospect. Next up, we're going to go to another defenseman, this time the first rounder in this last draft for the Habs, in Logan MAILLOux. Now, MAILLOux is an interesting one. In terms of his on-ice play, I'm not the biggest fan of him compared to other people, but in 12 games in the OHL this year, he has 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points. I like the skating there. I like some of the offensive instincts, but we also got some pretty bad news regarding him recently. He might potentially need shoulder surgery, which is a pretty big one for defensemen, and he could be out for the rest of the OHL season, which is just another bump in his development. So I feel like for the Montreal Canadiens, there's still potential there, but I still would have rather preferred some other guys, especially who are taken in the second round. Still, though, another option on the defense for the Habs in the future, and I think he will likely be an NHL defenseman. But now moving on to number 6, we're going to move on to one of my favorite personal Montreal Canadiens prospects, a guy that's had a huge turnaround over the past year and is going back in the forward side of things for the Habs. At number 6, I'm going to go with, in my opinion, one of the bigger draft steals over these past couple of years in Joshua Waugh. Now, Waugh's an interesting story. He ended up going first overall in the QMJHL draft a couple of years back, but with his stagnant production and his talent really not being used all too correctly, he ended up being drafted 150th overall in the 5th round by the Habs in last year's draft, and we've seen a complete turnaround from him. Now, in his draft year, when he was drafted in the 5th round, in 35 games, he only got 34 points, and with both teams he played at, it wasn't quite gelling correctly. This year, though, we've seen him absolutely explode. In 49 games, he has 36 goals, 56 assists for 92 points. He's on pace for 123 points on this QMJHL season, and that's really cool to see. His actual production and his talent has just been so much more consistent this year, and it's really showing that his confidence is truly back. This was a player that did have massive potential going back to when he was drafted first overall in the QMJHL draft, and we're starting to see that now. Just like Riley Kidney, there will definitely be some growing pains going to the pro level, but his passing ability, his awareness, and his overall quick thinking, I think will make him an NHL player and could at least make him a middle 6 option for the Habs that can score at a decent rate, be good playmaking wise, and just make smart decisions on the ice, which you always want to have. Now moving on to number 5, we're going to go to another Habs prospect that I like a lot, and another guy that the Habs got in a pretty good spot in the draft in Matthias Norlinder, another solid defensive prospect on the list. At age 21, he was really close to making this Habs team full-time, eventually got demoted and is playing solidly in the SHL this season, but he was drafted 64th overall in the 3rd round back in 2019 and has produced and gotten a lot better since then. He's a guy that I could definitely see in the NHL next season and having a full-time roster spot there. He's not the most physical defenseman in the world, but he's great at making space for himself. His awareness is impeccable. His skating and his agility is really solid as well. This is a player that I could see skating-wise and fundamentally being just a strong, potentially 4th defenseman for the Habs in the future. Nothing too special, but he's the type of defenseman you want to have on your team who gets out of the zone effectively and pushes play correctly. But now moving on to number 4, and the 4th best Montreal Canadiens prospect. This is actually the last forward on the group, but he definitely deserves to be in this top 10 and be this high in Sean Farrell. In my opinion, one of the most underrated prospects right now in the NHL, and he was a steal when he was drafted back in 2020, 124th overall in the 4th round by the Montreal Canadiens. Really, I think the biggest reason was his size at 5'9", and he's not a player that like a Logan Stankoven who is a brooding force, so there definitely is some concerns when he goes to the pro game, but he had a great USHL season last year where in 53 games he got 72 assists, 101 points, and this year going to Harvard University in 24 games, he has 10 goals, 18 assists, 28 points. Even in the Olympics for the US team, he got 6 points in 4 games played, looking solid and being a great part of that power play. In my opinion, I think this is a player that offensively has so much potential. Another guy that will need some patience once he gets to the AHL and potentially the NHL level, but I think his size isn't too big of a factor to his long-term potential with the passing, with the consistency he has, with the speed he has in the offensive zone. There's so much to love there when it comes to Sean Farrell, and I think there's potential for him to be an absolute monster, especially on the power play in the NHL in just a few seasons. Now, we really started getting to the great prospects for the Habs at number 4 with Sean Farrell, but now moving on, we're going to go to number 3 and continue that great trend with Jordan Harris, a guy that I think is going to be fantastic for this Montreal Canadiens team. Recently just signed his entry-level contract, which is great to see, and he'll be a big part of this Habs blue line going into the future. I see him being a 4th or 3rd solid skating defenseman that brings a lot of offensive creativity and great value there. He's 5'11", and he was another great pick by this Habs team, 71st overall in 2018, which is a fantastic value pick. Over the last couple years in the NCAA, he's been fantastic. In 2021, got 19 points in 19 games for Northeastern, and this year, being the captain for the team in 39 games, got 20 points. Yes, there was a dip in production, but at the same time, there was a lot more responsibility there overall, and I think Harris is ready for the pro game. Might maybe take 1 year in the AHL or some seasoning at the same time, but still, for this Habs team, they can have some patience with him and eventually get a middle pairing defenseman, which is going to be such a big part for their team. That skating, that overall offensive fundamentals are going to be huge for the Habs. Now moving on to number 2 and the 2nd best Montreal Canadiens prospect. This was the guy acquired in the Arturi Lehkonen trade and another big piece for this Habs decor going into the future. Next up, I have Justin Barron. Now, Barron is an interesting one with his injury history in the QMJHL. He's a guy that's honestly rebounded pretty excellently. He was a 25th overall pick back in 2020 by the Avs, and again, included in the LOGAN deal. He's another guy like a guy like Jordan Harris, who I think will be a middle pairing defenseman, bringing some great agility, some great skating, some good fundamentals, and the right amount of offensive aggressiveness, which will lend him to some good opportunities. And with that shot too, there's a lot to like. In the AHL last year, or I guess this season, in 43 games, he's gotten 5 goals, 15 assists for 20 points. He was recently just playing his first game as a Hab and looked pretty comfortable there as well, and especially in overtime, really using his aggressiveness in the right directions. This is a player, though, that will obviously be NHL ready for the Habs immediately, and I think will be a middle pairing, solid, dependable defenseman that, especially skating-wise, brings a lot of value. You can start to see a trend here of Habs defensive prospects. Skating is a big part of things, and to me, that's exactly what you want in the future of NHL defensemen. But now moving on to number 1 and the best Montreal Canadiens prospect, and if you guessed it was defenseman, you would be right, because it is yet another D-man, 16th overall back in the 2020 draft. It is KAIDEN GUHLE at the number 1 spot. 6'2" defenseman at age 20, has had a pretty great WHL season. I wasn't the hugest fan of the pick at the time. I thought maybe a Dawson Mercer would have been a better option for the Habs, and he's obviously done some good things in the NHL so far. But with KAIDEN GUHLE, he's limited his turnover rate since then. He's gotten a lot better in terms of transitions and getting out of his own zone, which is a huge part of it. But so far in the WHL this season, in 25 games, he has 5 goals, 20 assists for 25 points. He's a guy that's getting a lot more NHL ready, a lot better overall, and with that physical defensive prowess he already has, there's some big potential there. His shot is fantastic. He's getting a lot better on the power play, and I think for the Habs, you could have potentially a number 2 defenseman there. Nobody that's going to absolutely lead you like a Maurice Seider, but a defenseman who I think will be a fundamental part of a potential Stanley Cup winner if the Habs were to make it. And I think at the same time, he's a guy that the Habs will love to have with his physical prowess, with his solid skating, again, just like some other Habs defensive prospects. He's a guy that can, at points, potentially bring it all for the Habs team, and I hope with his progression, we'll see a lot more of him over the next couple of decades for Montreal. But that will be it for today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you did enjoy, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Make sure you comment down below what you guys agree and disagree with my rankings. What would be your top 10? What would be your best Habs prospects? Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure you share this video to any Habs fans or even NHL fans you guys know online, and I will see you in the next one. Have a fantastic day. Drink some water, breathe with your nose, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.